A simple elderly woman denied entry to court. Her husband, the supreme judge, walks in. Margaret clutched her worn leather purse as she approached the imposing marble steps of the courthouse. The October wind whipped through downtown Washington, D.C., sending fallen leaves dancing across the plaza. At 72, her knees protested each step, but she pressed forward with quiet determination today. She'd dressed in her best outfit, a simple blue dress she'd owned for 15 years, carefully pressed. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble, making the building seem even more imposing now. She paused at the bottom of the steps, gathering her courage for what she hoped would be a special day. The security guard at the entrance barely glanced up from his newspaper as she reached the metal detector. "Ma'am, you can't come in here dressed like that," he said, his voice carrying dismissive authority. Margaret's weathered hands trembled slightly as she looked down at her modest but clean appearance. "I'm here for the ceremony," she explained softly, her voice barely audible above the city traffic. The guard finally looked up, taking in her gray hair pulled back in a simple bun and faded dress. "This is the Supreme Court, not a soup kitchen. The public gallery requires appropriate attire today." Heat rose to Margaret's cheeks as other visitors in expensive suits brushed past her without pause. "But I am appropriately dressed," she insisted, straightening her shoulders with quiet dignity now. The guard shook his head firmly. "Look, lady, there's a formal investiture today. You need to leave." Several people turned to stare, their curiosity adding to her growing sense of humiliation and hurt. Margaret felt the sting of tears but refused to let them fall in front of this young man's judgment. A small crowd had begun to gather, their whispers creating a humiliating chorus around Margaret. She recognized the look in their eyes, the same one she'd seen countless times throughout her life. To them, she was invisible, just another old woman who didn't belong in their polished world today. "Please," she tried once more. "I traveled all night by bus from Tennessee to be here for this." The guard stood up, his hand moving to his radio. "Ma'am, I won't ask again. You need to leave now." Margaret's fingers tightened on her purse strap as she fought to maintain her composure publicly. She had faced poverty, loss, and hardship, but this moment of rejection cut deeper than expected. The October morning had started with such hope as she'd stepped off the Greyhound bus at dawn. She'd walked slowly through the quiet streets, watching the city wake up around her with anticipation. She'd saved for months for this trip, putting aside dollars from her Social Security checks carefully. In her purse was a photograph, worn at the edges from years of handling, of a younger couple smiling. The woman in the photo wore the same blue dress, standing beside a young man with ambitious eyes. Now, 50 years later, that dress marked her as an outsider in this world of marble and power. "Is there a problem here, Johnson?" A younger guard approached, his expression equally dismissive. Margaret took a step back, her heart heavy with the weight of dreams deferred and dignity denied. The second guard studied Margaret with the practiced eye of someone trained to assess threats quickly. "This woman refuses to leave," Johnson explained. "Claims she's here for the investiture ceremony today." Margaret noticed how they spoke about her as if she weren't standing right there, fully present. "I have an invitation," she said quietly, reaching into her purse with hands that shook slightly now. Both guards exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their skepticism regarding her claim today. "Sure you do," the younger one muttered, his tone dripping with barely concealed condescension now. The crowd of onlookers had grown, their smartphones discreetly recording her humiliation publicly. Margaret fumbled through her purse, past the carefully wrapped peanut butter sandwich she'd brought. Her fingers searched for the cream-colored envelope she'd guarded so carefully during the long trip. "It's here somewhere," she murmured, aware of how desperate she must appear to these strangers now. A woman in a designer suit checked her diamond watch impatiently, sighing loud enough to be heard. "Security!" "Can we please clear this entrance?" the woman demanded with practiced authority clearly. The guards straightened, responding immediately to wealth and privilege in ways they never would to her. Margaret's cheeks burned with shame as she continued searching through her modest belongings, frantically. Finally, her fingers found the envelope, slightly creased but bearing the Supreme Court's official seal. "Here," she said, extending it toward Johnson with a mixture of hope and lingering dignity intact. He took it reluctantly, as if touching something contaminated, and glanced at it dismissively now. "Anyone can print something like this these days," he said, not even bothering to open it fully. The younger guard was already reaching for Margaret's elbow to escort her away from the building. "Please don't touch me," she said firmly, surprising herself with the strength in her voice suddenly. The plaza seemed to spin slightly as she faced the reality of being turned away from this moment. "What's your name?" the younger guard asked, his tone suggesting he was humoring her temporarily now. "Margaret," she replied simply, seeing no point in giving her full name to these dismissive men today. "Well, Margaret, I'm sure you understand we have security protocols to follow here strictly today." She understood all too well. She'd lived 72 years understanding exactly how the world worked. The powerful made the rules, and people like her were expected to accept them, without question ever. "I'll wait outside then," she said quietly, moving toward a bench visible from the entrance nearby. The guards seemed satisfied with this resolution, already turning their attention elsewhere quickly. Margaret lowered herself onto the cold stone bench, her joints protesting from the long bus journey. From here, she could see the steady stream of visitors entering the courthouse without any issues. Men in $1,000 suits and women in designer dresses passed through security effortlessly now. Not one of them was stopped or questioned about their right to be in that hallowed building today. She unwrapped her sandwich, realizing she hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon's departure time. The peanut butter stuck to the roof of her mouth as she watched her dreams slip away, slowly today. 50 years of waiting, and she couldn't even make it past the front door of her destination now. A limousine pulled up to the curb, its black surface reflecting the morning sunlight brilliantly. Margaret barely glanced at it. Such displays of wealth were common in this part of the capital city. She was lost in memories of a young law student who'd promised to change the world years before. They'd met at a lunch counter in Nashville during the sit-ins, both fighting for justice together. He'd worn a second-hand suit and carried law books held together with rubber bands back then always. She'd been a seamstress, taking in washing to help pay for his final year of law school, secretly. They'd married in her grandmother's backyard, with wildflowers for decoration and hope for a future. The limousine door opened, and Margaret heard the guards scrambling to attention immediately nearby. She didn't look up, focused instead on folding the plastic wrap from her humble sandwich carefully. "Mr. Chief Justice, sir." Johnson's voice had transformed into one of complete deference suddenly now. "Good morning." She heard the passenger door close and footsteps approaching the courthouse entrance. The voice made her freeze, her hands still holding the crumpled plastic wrap from her sandwich now. It was deeper now, carrying the authority of decades on the bench, but she knew that voice intimately, slowly. Margaret lifted her eyes to see a figure in black robes walking toward the entrance alone. The man moved with the careful dignity of age, his silver hair gleaming in the October morning sun. Even from behind, she recognized the slight favor of his left leg from an old football injury. The guards stood at attention as he approached, their entire demeanor transformed by his presence. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, and Margaret saw him glance at the crowd still lingering nearby. "No, sir. Just someone who was confused about the dress code," Johnson replied quickly to him now. The Chief Justice turned slightly, and Margaret held her breath as their eyes met across the plaza. For a moment, time seemed to stop as recognition dawned in those familiar brown eyes of his, slowly. William Harper had aged well, she thought. though the weight of years showed in his lined face clearly. He stood perfectly still, his judicial robes moving slightly in the morning breeze around him now. The guards looked confused as their Chief Justice stared at an old woman on a bench so intently today. Margaret? His voice cracked slightly on her name. 50 years of separation in that single word. She stood slowly, smoothing down her blue dress, the same one she'd worn to his first court argument. "Hello, William," she said simply, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her chest right now. The plaza seemed to hold its breath as the most powerful judge in America stepped toward her slowly. Johnson stepped forward nervously. "Sir, do you know this woman? She claimed to have an invitation today." William's eyes never left Margaret's face as he replied, "Yes, Officer Johnson. I know her very well." The crowd's whispers grew louder as they sensed a story unfolding before their very eyes unexpectedly. "She's my wife," William said clearly, his voice carrying across the plaza with judicial authority. The words hit the crowd like a thunderclap, phones rising to capture this unprecedented moment now. Johnson's face went pale as he realized the magnitude of his mistake in this public setting today. Your wife, sir. But we didn't..." He stammered, unable to form coherent words. William walked past the stunned guards, closing the distance between himself and Margaret steadily now. "You came," he said softly, reaching out to touch her face with a gentleness that belied his power. "You asked me to," she replied, leaning into his touch as tears finally spilled down her cheeks freely. "I'm sorry, sir," Johnson interrupted desperately. "She didn't say she was your wife when she arrived." Margaret spoke before William could respond. "I said I was Margaret. That should have been enough today." William's jaw tightened as he processed what had happened, his judicial mind cataloging every detail. "Indeed it should have," he said, his voice carrying the weight of highest judicial authority clearly. The younger guard stepped forward. "Sir, if we had known..." "Her attire didn't suggest..." "We apologize." "Her attire," William repeated slowly, looking at Margaret's simple dress with entirely different eyes. "This dress," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "paid for my last year of law school, long ago." Margaret squeezed his hand as he continued, addressing the growing crowd as much as the guards now. "This woman worked 18-hour days as a seamstress so I could study without worry back then. She mended other people's clothes while wearing threadbare ones so I could have a suit for court." The plaza had gone completely silent, except for the distant sound of D.C. traffic passing by outside. 50 years ago, William continued, his voice growing stronger, "we made a choice, together, as a couple. I would pursue the law, chase my dreams of justice, while she held our world together, quietly always. We knew the path would require sacrifices, that we'd have to live apart more than together sometimes." Margaret watched the guards shrink under his words, but felt no satisfaction in their discomfort now. "She never came to Washington, never sat in my courtroom, never sought the spotlight ever before today. Not because she wasn't welcome, but because she insisted I focus on the work that mattered most." His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the practiced ease of decades together. "Still, today is my last investiture ceremony," William explained to the transfixed crowd around them both. "After 50 years of service, I'm stepping down from the bench to finally go home permanently soon. I asked my wife to come for this one ceremony, to see what her sacrifice helped build over time. And you..." He turned to the guards, his voice sharp with judicial precision. "Denied her entry today. Johnson looked like he might be sick. Sir, we have procedures. She didn't look like... She didn't look like what?" William asked quietly, the question hanging heavy in the morning air now. "Like someone who belonged here," Johnson admitted finally, his shame evident to everyone watching today. William nodded slowly. "That's the problem with our eyes sometimes. They see what they expect to see. You saw an old woman in a simple dress, and assumed she didn't belong in these marble halls today. You never saw the woman who held our family together while I traveled the judicial circuit endlessly, the woman who raised our children alone when I was sequestered for weeks, during difficult cases always, who answered the phone at 2 a.m. when death threats came, because of my civil rights decisions regularly. Margaret felt the weight of recognition, not pity, but understanding, from the crowd around them now. You saw poverty where you should have seen sacrifice, William concluded with finality in his voice. A woman in the crowd stepped forward, the same one who had complained about the delay earlier today. "Ma'am," she said to Margaret, "I owe you an apology. I was rude and impatient without cause before." Margaret nodded graciously, though her attention remained focused on her husband beside her, still now. Chief Justice Harper, a court official, appeared, looking flustered. "The ceremony begins in 10 minutes. William straightened his robes with one hand, keeping the other firmly clasped with Margaret's own hand. "Then we should go inside," he said simply. "Margaret, you still have that invitation with you somewhere." She smiled, producing the now crumpled envelope from her purse with quiet triumph, finally achieved today. William turned to the guards one final time, his expression carrying the weight of judicial wisdom earned. "Gentlemen, you'll write a full report of this incident for your supervisor by day's end today, please. Include your assumptions about who belongs in these halls, based solely on their appearance or attire. This building represents justice for all Americans, not just those who can afford designer clothing." The guards nodded miserably. Understanding that this lesson would follow them throughout their careers, William offered Margaret his arm formally, as he had on their wedding day, 50 years ago. "Exactly. Shall we go in, my dear? You've waited long enough to see where I've spent our years apart working." As they walked toward the entrance, the crowd parted respectfully, many capturing this moment digitally. Margaret felt the eyes upon them, no longer dismissive, but wondering at their unexpected story revealed. At the metal detector, Johnson stammered, "Ma'am, Mrs. Chief Justice, I'm deeply sorry for before. It's Mrs. Harper," she corrected gently. "I've never needed his title to know my own worth, young man." William smiled at that, the same smile she'd fallen in love with at a Nashville lunch counter long ago. They passed through security together, her simple dress and his formal robes equally belonging here now. The marble halls echoed with their footsteps as they walked toward the courtroom, side by side finally. "I should have brought you here sooner," William said quietly as they paused before the courtroom doors. "You brought me when it mattered most," Margaret replied, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from his robes. "Your first day and your last. That's all I needed to see. The work in between was yours to do alone." Court officials scrambled to find her a seat in the VIP section, but she chose the public gallery instead. "I'll sit where any citizen would sit," she told them firmly. "That's the point of justice, isn't it?" William kissed her cheek softly before taking his place on the bench for his final ceremony presiding. Margaret sat straight and proud, her blue dress a testament to love that transcends all appearances. As the ceremony began, she thought about the young couple in that worn photograph in her purse today. They'd dreamed of justice and equality, of a world where everyone would be seen for their true worth. The road had been longer and harder than they'd imagined on that hopeful wedding day, years before now. But they'd traveled it together, even when miles apart, bound by something stronger than proximity alone. When William spoke his final words as Chief Justice, his eyes found hers across the crowded courtroom. In them, she saw not the powerful judge the world knew, but the young man who'd promised her forever. And Margaret smiled, knowing that after 50 years of service to justice, he was finally coming home,